contender. Speaking of talent, Jennifer Lawless down at American University. Always like to catch up with her every Tuesday to hear what's going on inside the Beltway. Jennifer, how are you today?
Good, how are you?
Doing well up here. Plenty of politics and news going on here in Providence, but we're all keeping tabs on what's happening down there inside the Beltway. So much to talk about. Let's start off with the president and his sort of past week, and let's start off with the job numbers and what folks are saying. Sort of him touting how great they are, but kind of folks pointing out that maybe these job numbers are par for the course or even a little less than what had been in recent years. What's the talk down there?
Right, so the talk on the Democratic side of the aisle is that Trump has nothing to pat himself on the back about. These numbers were already baked into an economy that Barack Obama had fixed, and frankly, the rate of growth is lower than it was this quarter in 2015 and 2016. So that's not necessarily good news for the president. The Republicans, on the other hand, are saying that this is complete evidence of Trump delivering on his early economic promises, and this is what the narrative should be, not all of the other crises that seem to be emerging from the White House. Whether you like him or not, though, the fact of the matter is the economic numbers are generally good news, which means that the approval ratings and the record disapproval that Trump is registering is frankly quite shocking given these economic numbers. Most voters out there don't realize that these numbers have nothing to do with Trump.
And so, as you said, the spins on both sides, the Democrats claiming the win, sort of the Republicans claiming the win. You know, what does the average American think? As you just pointed out, does it play out in the approval numbers?
It really doesn't, and frankly, the average American is going to be disappointed because these numbers are going to start to decrease, and we're at a point where we're at less than 5% unemployment, the economy is pretty strong, it only has down to go, and Trump will single-handedly be blamed for that because Barack Obama has been out of the White House long enough where he won't have to bear that brunt.
And so what's the talk, job numbers? Let's talk about the Dow. The president keeps pointing to the performance of the stock market as an indication of his economic policy. What's the chatter inside the Beltway?
Well, the interesting chatter here is not so much that the Dow reaching these record levels is an endorsement or confidence in the president's policies, or in fact that it has anything to do with them. But what's somewhat surprising is that we've reached these numbers despite Trump's performance. And there was generally this sense of concern regarding whether the U.S. economy and frankly the global economy would fare well when there seems to be so much uncertainty coming from the United States and so much uncertainty out of the White House.
So going from the financial to the political a little bit, let's talk about Special Counsel Mueller, the grand jury. What do we know and what do we not know?
Well, we don't know specifically what evidence he's bringing before the grand jury, but what we do know is twofold. The first is that this is a new grand jury, so this is not the grand jury that had already been convened in Northern Virginia to look into Paul Manafort and Michael Flynn. That suggests that there's new evidence or that there's a new potential suspect, that's the wrong word, but target of interest in the investigation. The other thing that we do know is that it's very, very likely that it has to do with economic dealings and that these dealings could very well transcend the campaign. They might have to do with financial holdings and deals that have been made long before Donald Trump decided to run for president. So, for years now, we've been talking about Donald Trump's tax returns. Chances are we're going to start to see some of that documentation. The other thing that I should note here is that you don't convene a grand jury unless you're looking to present evidence, and if not ultimately get an indictment, then certainly be close to putting forward a recommendation or a summary of fact. So the Mueller investigation is clearly moving along, and this is an obvious concrete step that demonstrates that progress.
And as you mentioned when I asked, what do we know, what do we not know, do we have any sense of time frame?
No, although I think by convening this grand jury, it would not be a surprise to start seeing witnesses and documents being subpoenaed. And I think as we get closer and closer to those high-level names being paraded in front of the grand jury, we'll have a better idea of how close we are to an end. But, something to keep in mind is that the Clinton investigation under Kenneth Starr lasted years and years and years, and it wasn't until close to the end of that investigation when we uncovered the Monica Lewinsky facts that really gained any kind of steam. So this is a little bit different because everybody's already paying attention, and the allegations and the concerns are things that people understand, whereas Whitewater was not something that the average American understood.
Clearly, but you did point to just one point and one facet of it, again, the protracted length of time of Whitewater. Could we see something of that level of time go by before we actually know anything?
I think it's a little bit unlikely that we would go that long because we do know why these documents have been subpoenaed. In Whitewater, it seems a little bit more like a fishing expedition. It was unclear exactly what the concern was, and then it was unclear how that was going to be politically relevant. Here, we're pretty sure what the political relevance is. The question is there evidence linking the Trump administration or the Trump campaign to Russia dealings or anything else?
Let's talk a little bit about what's going on right now with the President's Opioid Commission, a special commission, again, on this epidemic, and basically starting to hear more from it now, and even more from the President himself. What's the thought on how the Trump administration will both approach this issue, and could it possibly have an impact?
I don't know. I don't think anybody knows, in part because the president is flip-flopping on how important he thinks it is and how seriously he's taking it. For example, it seems like appointing this commission and then listening to its recommendations means that he's taking the matter seriously, but then we overhear a phone call that he's made where he basically says that New Hampshire is a drug-infested den and the people there are pretty useless. So that's not necessarily the kind of commentary that you want from a president who's working to solve a national crisis.
And speaking of national and international issues, as it has in recent weeks, and it's been ratcheting up even more, the North Korea issue, we just saw reports today from the Washington Post that they've found evidence that the North Korean government can have the capacity to put nuclear warheads on missiles. How much of this is taking up oxygen down there, or is it just maybe taking up more attention from the national press of sort of the fear factor of what this could all mean? And then not as much down in D.C. where people are actually paying more attention to domestic policy.
Well, I mean, I think it's taking up a lot of oxygen, and rightfully so. This is a potential crisis. Unanimous dealings from the United Nations saying that North Korea cannot do this. Kim Jong-un basically saying he doesn't care about these sanctions and he's not willing to negotiate or have a conversation. This is a problem. And right now, we also have a president who has the attention span of a gnat. And so he should be spending all of his time discussing this and talking about it. And instead, I just saw right before we hopped on that he had just leaked he tweeted a news story where Fox News had basically leaked some confidential information from the United Nations. And Nikki Haley had to come out and say, look, I can't comment on that. It's classified. And so this is not the way that you handle international crises. And so I think down here, a lot of people on both sides of the aisle are worried because this is a very serious situation and it's unclear that Donald Trump is prepared to handle it the way that a serious president needs to.
Well, we're continuing to follow all issues down in D.C., but it's August 8th. What are you looking at moving out down there, Jennifer?
What am I looking at? What? I'm sorry?
Oh, politically. What's going on? What are we going to be talking about next week?
Same old, same old. I mean, my favorite story of today is that twice a day Donald Trump is presented with a portfolio of all of the great things the press have said about him that day. Have you seen this?
I heard that it was revealed that there is a staffer specifically at the White House, I believe being paid around $89,000 to just pull the good news. So is he just being told the good news by his staff?
In a folder, and basically every morning at 9:30 and then every afternoon at 4:30, and it's supposed to be sort of this twice-a-day affirmation of how great he is. So my sense is that while Congress is in semi-recess, that will be, the basic news of the day. The one thing that I should note is that Mitch McConnell seems to have said that it's important for the American people to stop listening to the artificial deadlines set by the president when it comes to health care, infrastructure, and tax reform, which suggests that over the course of the next month, while Congress is in recess, and then certainly in early September, we shouldn't expect there to be actual votes on any of those issues. So
it's sort of tempering expectations just a little bit.
A little.
So if he gets the good news folder twice a day, when does he get the bad news folder?
I don't think he gets the bad news folder, and I think that's part of the problem. So we'll see. I mean, with Kelly now as chief of staff, we'll have a better sense, I think, of the extent to which Trump is able to handle the bad news. But up until this point, it seems pretty clear that when there was bad news, his immediate reaction was to tweet about it or to fly off the handle. So it makes sense that those in the inner circle would decide to sort of shield him from a lot of it.
Well, doesn't that kind of go back to his conspiracy that there are leaks in the White House? But you not really, if you were a Trump staffer, want the press to know that you are kind of spoon feeding him just the good press. I mean, who divulged that he's simply getting the cherry on top?
Right. I mean, I think it does speak to a broader problem in the White House. And with the dismissals of both Sean Spicer and Reince Priebus, it's very likely that these kinds of leaks will continue, not necessarily from Spicer or Priebus, but from the people that were loyal to them or the staffers that they had who felt that they were wrongfully terminated. There's probably more loyalty to the both of them from some of the traditional staffers in the White House than there is to Donald Trump. The other thing that I would note is a little bit of an inconsistency. It's kind of pathetic to believe the news when it says good things about you and to dismiss it as fake news when it says bad things. So my sense is that that's going to be getting a lot of attention as well. You can't sort of embrace what you like and then throw away what you don't when it's coming from the exact same source.
Well, you know, this the whole fake news phenomenon, that's what I've found. I'm sure you have as well. If folks don't agree with something, immediately label it as fake news. Well, Jennifer Lawless,